What has been your worst experience flying in a plane? 20,000 feet. The O2 masks come down. Long silence from the crew. Finally, the pilot comes on and says lots of electrical systems are out and we're landing at a small airport in 9 minutes. The descent was on full air brakes, which made the flight loud and shaking, with kids screaming because their ears were hurting, parents screaming at their kids to blow while holding their noses, adult behind us slapping his thighs shouting endlessly oh no. On no. But we got an $8 voucher for lunch at the airport while we waited for a new plane. On a flight from Philadelphia to Denver, late December 1990, as we get about an hour from Denver, pilot tells us a blizzard has closed the Denver airport, and we need to divert. We divert to a place called Gunnison Company. Gunnison Airport is small, not really set up for large commercial airliners. As we approach, I look out the window and see mountain tops on either side. The captain comes on and tells us to prepare for an emergency landing, meaning stow your stuff, buckle your seat belt, and assume the crash position. As in put your head between your legs. Now I'm about 14 years old, traveling with my aunt, 2 cousins and their 2 friends. My cousin Billy and I are joking about this situation, while my aunt is praying with my other cousin. We land, and need basically every foot of the runway to come to a stop. The pilot then has to get off the plane and make a phone call because we are basically alone, hours from Denver. They get some shuttle buses to show up after about an hour. Then we begin the 6-hour ride to Denver. That was a long-ass day. Colorado. Here, blizzards are the result of a very specific set of conditions, namely, snowfall combined with fast gusting winds and very low visibility. Because this is really a perfect storm of bullshit, blizzards usually only affect a very small area at a time. While it was possible that there was snowfall in Gunnison where I landed, it was almost certainly not blizzard conditions. While interstates and large highways often close during big snowstorms, this is mostly a damage control measure. Lots of stupid people will underestimate the conditions and cause crashes, and the DOT wants to avoid that. A skilled and experienced driver, however, can navigate rough snowy conditions using small highways and back roads to reach a destination even in shit weather, provided that the snowfall on the pavement doesn't prevent vehicles from physically moving forward. Because of the first point, and because snowplows work fast as hell in Colorado, it's likely that the storm was over and the major roads were cleared by the time I reached Denver. Plane safety is way more anal than car safety. Even accounting for the above, Ops shuttle to Denver was probably not much safer, or even less safe, than landing in that blizzard would have been. It's just that planes are far more regulated than cars, so the bar is much higher for what's acceptable in terms of safety. About 6 years ago I was sitting on a plane and I suddenly felt a tickle in my throat. It just wouldn't go away. I'd cough and cough and cough. Nothing. The only thing that helped was ice chips. But even then I couldn't stop. It was miserable. That night I woke up in the middle of the night with 2 swollen eyes, swollen lips, hives all over my body, hot joints, and a tight chest. I was having some severe allergic reaction to something, which means that on the plane, my throat was closing and I just didn't know it. Of course the ice chips helped because they were keeping the swelling down. What's weird is that has never happened before or since then, and I'm not allergic to anything that I know of. Something similar happened to me. I ate a burger from Hungry Jack's, Aussie Burger King, and I got a severe reaction. It started with severe itching, followed by hives, swollen face, and my throat was beginning to close up. I had to go to the hospital because it was the weekend and all the doctors were closed. The worst of it was my feet got so swollen that it really hurt to walk. It sucked. The strange thing is that I had Hungry Jack's lots of times before and lots of times afterwards, and I never had that reaction again. This was when I was 10-11 years old. went on a 9-hour flight and had the middle seat. An older woman sat in the window seat and had a horrendous smelling perfume on, the kind that gives you a headache in the first 10 minutes. She went to the restroom and reapplied her perfume every couple of hours. The smell plus turbulence was enough for me to throw up for the duration of the flight. For years after, I was so scarred that I took motion sickness pills every flight, only to realize I didn't have motion sickness. It was just that old woman's horrible perfume. My daughter got sick for the first time on a plane when she was 5, and for 8 years after. Every time she would fly, she would vomit and dry heave the entire flights. Sometimes she would start throwing up just driving into the airport and seeing the planes. Finally, she went on a school trip and discovered she didn't actually have air sickness. It was all psychological, stemming from that one trip when she was young. I guess the peer pressure and being with friends distracted her. She's been fine since. I was on a nighttime flight 15 years ago. All of a sudden, the cabin lights are turned on to full blast and the captain makes an announcement. You may be smelling a noxious odor. We have an electrical fire on board, and can't be sure how quickly it might spread. We are being diverted to the nearest airport and will be executing an emergency landing in 15 minutes. Please give your attention to your flight attendants as they instruct you in proper crash landing procedure. I would have thought there would be hysteria, but everyone became deathly quiet. I had my 11-month-old with me and was advised to hold him in my arms and assume the crash landing procedure as best as possible to shield his body with mine. Everyone on that plane thought we were dead. I was talking quietly to my baby, pointing out the window at the earth below and telling him how beautiful it all was. I didn't want him to die scared. After about 10 minutes and no catastrophic failure, we all began to relax a bit, thinking that the fire was contained or spreading extremely slowly. We all positioned ourselves for a crash landing. The tarmac was ablaze with the flashing lights of fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles, all in preparation for a worst-case scenario. We landed smoothly and without incident. Thank God. That was a really bad 15 minutes. Same kind of small plane. Florida to Louisiana. Turbulence was shaking us up and down in our seats practically the whole flight. After battling so much wind, it had used up most of the fuel. We weren't going to make our destination. They had to open up a closed airport for an emergency landing to refuel. I've never been on a quieter flight where it was clear upon glancing around that we were all praying very loudly inside our heads. The fear was palpable. I wasn't sure if I should be glad my fiancé was with me so I could squeeze his hand in terror, poor guy, or be sad that he was going to die with me. After the refueling and emergency restroom visit for everyone, airport tried to refuse us off the plane. We landed safely at our destination and thanked the crew profusely. I wish parents would prepare kids for big events. Flying in a plane is a big event for a child. When my kids were little and going on first flight, as toddlers, we bought storybooks about flying. We talked to them about what to expect, and we role-played. They knew what was expected before we even got near a plane. With babies it's harder because oftentimes it's a near issue and you can't do anything about it. I remember flying with my oldest and starting to descend and she started fussing. Some old lady kept looking back at me. So, I decided to nurse my baby because the sucking would maybe pop her ears. Stupid old cow gave me even dirtier looks. Are you me? I was actually feeling it the whole flight, but it didn't hit until we were landing. First round in the barf bag, but no way the second round was going in there. Got up and ran the second we hit the runway. Flight attendant tried to stop me, but they already knew I wasn't feeling well. I had asked them if they had anything for nausea earlier during the flight, so I just gave them a look and shook my head and they knew. I made it to the bathroom in time, but did not get the toilet seat up quick enough, so the next wave just went everywhere. Spent the rest of the 20-minute taxi to the gate spewing. I felt bad for whoever had to clean up that bathroom. A few come to mind. On a 13-hour flight, my neighbors were a very old Chinese man and his wife who declined to eat any of the airline's food, instead eating some kind of fermented mushrooms they'd brought in a jar with them. The mushrooms stank horribly, and each time they opened the drawer it immediately woke everyone around them up, and then the smell lingered in the area for a while. Once was in turbulence so bad that a flight attendant hit her head hard enough on the overhead bin and had to be stretchered off. The lights were flashing on and off in the cabin and multiple people around me were audibly saying prayers. Then, last weekend actually, had a hell of an ordeal with American Airlines where they cancelled our flight, wouldn't answer phones and couldn't get a customer service rep to speak to us for over 3 hours. Eventually offered us a flight, at no additional charge, that took off 3 days later and would have cut our whole vacation in half, which we declined. Eventually got us a taxi to an airport an hour away for a different flight while accidentally cancelling our return flight, so we basically had to do the whole ordeal over again on the way back. I was on a super budget flight from Nevada to Ohio, for business. We usually fly Southwest, but because the client was picking up the bill, it was one of those carriers that should pay you to fly. I am 6 feet 2 inches, guy to my left is about the same, which means I have been slid over to the right next to a woman in the window seat. Throughout the entire flight I see her rocking back and forth, leaning her head down between her legs, and making whispered statements accompanied with whimpering. I thought for sure I was sitting next to someone with that best some severe flight anxiety. At worst I am not sure. It wasn't until the end that I hear a small bark come from below her seat, and I noticed the pet carrier holding the small dog this lady was calming. I thought for sure she was just going to have a complete psychotic episode next to me the entire flight. 6-hour flight to the West Coast. Plane was very hot inside. Had 2 small kids behind me screaming and kicking the whole time. The row was 3 seats wide. My row was 3 sweaty fat people, myself included. I had the window seat. Behind us was the mother on the aisle seat with a toddler in her lap. The toddler would screech every couple minutes and would run up and down the aisle. The 2 older kids behind me spent most of the flight climbing on my seat and playing in the floor hitting my seat. Their names were super basic names like Jaden and Brayden. I learned through the non-stop arguing and screeching fights. The mom did nothing the entire flight, even with requests by the staff. She only said this is why daddy doesn't want us to visit. I don't get it. I have kids and I just give them a dose of children's Dramamine, knocks them out cold. I just don't understand parents that won't even consider those types of things. I don't advise anybody to follow my lead. I'm an idiot. But this idiot's kids are sleeping away or so groggy they don't want to cause a scene whenever we travel, and we have to travel a lot since we live so far from home. 10-12 plus hour transits aren't far-fetched for us. My wife and I like to travel. We live far from our families and we like going to far-off places from time to time. 10 plus hours on a shady Latin American bus into the mountains? Sure, why not? Flying home to Australia. There's some European family whose daytime is apparently our nighttime. Bored kids run endless up and down the aisles making sleep impossible. Cabin staff were useless. While in transit, a kid produces a green laser and waves it around, unsure if it was powerful enough to blind. But idiot parents don't tell him off. I just walked away, had enough bullshit. Thankfully their connecting flight was not the same. Slept for maybe 2 hours before arriving to attend my mother's funeral. Was on a study tour when I was 10. The principal had the same surname as me so he was arranged to sit next to me. He was nice but any kid would be frightened to sit next to the head of school for several hours. I was so nervous I didn't chat with my friends and watched movies on the TV, trying to be the best behaving student. The worst part is that he keeps using the flight's deck of cards to attempt magic with me, and failed every time. I experienced my first cringe on that plane and it lasted 4 hours. Also I was having a fever, but there's no way I would give up the chance so I still got on the plane. Finally something I can answer. I was headed to the Philippines on a 2-week vacation with my cousin. We were in San Francisco waiting to board our plane got delayed 4 hours. That's just the start. Finally after boarding, they had overseated the plane and no one was volunteering, so they started to force people off the plane and I had been chosen. After some arguing and negotiating, Me and my cousin thankfully stayed on the plane. After taking off and eating our dinner on the plane, the lights got turned off. As the flight attendant was navigating the cabin and handing out drinks, she tripped over someone's foot in the aisle and spilled beer over me and my cousin. After getting cleaned up and into clean clothes, almost everyone was asleep as we were in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was roughly 3 a.m. at this point. I can never sleep on planes, so I was wide awake. I decided to go brush my teeth and use the restroom. Being a multitasker I was using the restroom while brushing my teeth. I know it's unsanitary, but being a guy and having two hands makes me productive, haha. Then everything went south. The plane gave one small bump warning of turbulence with no comment from the pilot. Out of nowhere we hit dead air. The plane dropped, and I mean dropped. My body flew up and smashed the ceiling. Toothpaste and pee flying everywhere in the latrine. Meanwhile all I hear is bloody murder screaming on the cabin outside the door. I was on the ceiling for a solid 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. We finally hit good air and leveled out. Income smashing back down and hit hard. Latrine always an absolute mess. I rush out of the bathroom to my seat and buckle in immediately. The cabin was destroyed. People's food, drinks, personal items were everywhere. Seats were soaked, including mine. Ceiling had food stuck to it. People were still screaming and crying. The pilot came on and said that the dead air was no on the radar and the rest of the flight would be smooth. And thank God it was. The rest of the flight was peaceful, but holy hell was the first half of a 10 hours flight miserable. Thankfully I always packed 2 change of clothes on carry-on for international flights, so I had another clean pair to change into. TLDR, 4-hour delayed flight, almost got kicked off due to overbooking. Beer spilled all over me, crazy turbulence which caused pee and toothpaste to go everywhere and hearing bloody murder, and then a messy cabin for the remainder of the flight. Always wear a seatbelt even when the sign is turned off. Edit, spelling. 14-hour flight to Japan, seated in front of someone who was shouting at random intervals through the flight. We could tell there was something going on, and I don't know if his caretaker could have done anything, but it was still a long flight. Early morning flight to Hawaii for a school trip. Fainted on the first flight, but didn't have time to grab breakfast during the layover. Couple of hours in, started having pretty extreme nausea, but didn't recognize it fast enough. Didn't get to the bathroom in time. Definitely barfed in my hands in the aisle. Had to get up a few more times too, but luckily made it to the bathroom in time. Not fun. I had the same thing happen to me, and I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall. It was a 12-hour flight to Tokyo. While everyone was boarding, I was trying to find a way to even fit in that spot with my long legs. Then the person with the seat next to me, more legroom, showed up. She was a nice young lady from the US Navy, barely over 5 feet tall, on her way to a base in Japan. She graciously offered to swap seats. She got the window she wanted, but I thankfully got enough legroom without having to amputate above the knee. I hope she enjoyed the flight and her time in Tokyo, cause she saved me 12 hours of extreme discomfort. I was seated in the front row, bulkhead seat. As the plane began takeoff and the G-force hit, one of the ovens in the wall and the galley just in front of me and to the right ejected from its usual place and crashed to the floor, tumbling into my leg. The oven was filled with empty metal trays, so the sound it made upon crashing to the floor was unlike any noise one might expect during takeoff. It was immediately followed by screams, utterances to an assortment of deities, and the sound of collective defecation as the unwashed masses behind me envisioned all manner of catastrophe unfolding. The ovens are modular and simply slide an end out for replacement, but they are held in place with screws. The previous flight had oven issues, so maintenance arrived and replaced the oven. They failed to reinstall the screws. On a flight from Warsaw, to Chicago, I was on a small regional jet. I was talking to my coworker in the seat across the aisle as we approached Chicago. One moment I'm looking face to face with him, then suddenly I was looking down at him. Right after that, I was looking up at him. We finally settled back into a normal cruising pattern, but it was a scary WTF just happened. moment. I don't think we came close to rolling over, but it sure as hell felt that way. When we arrived at O'Hare, where I considered kissing the tarmac, a fellow passenger suggested that we'd somehow been caught in the wake of a larger jet. Sounded plausible but not terribly reassuring. The best moment occurred after the pilot brought the plane back under control. The cabin was deadly silent, and the captain opened his microphone, cleared his throat, and said, "Sorry." He was a man of few words, I guess.